Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cine Mancuso, and this is Notes on the News. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the biggest stories in film, media, and entertainment and give you my thoughts. If you join us live, super happy to have you. If at any point in the show you have any questions or comments about any of the topics I'm covering, feel free to drop them in the live chat. Last week we had a really good conversation going. It's always a little more fun and interesting for me if other people are chiming in, so I have something else to talk about besides just the, my own notes. So definitely let me know if you have any of those questions or comments. If you haven't already, please like this video. It really, really helps with engagement and the algorithm and people finding the channel. So if you haven't on the channel, why not subscribe? Trying to grow this community as best as I can here. If you're watching this after the fact, still super happy to have you. By the time you're watching this, there should be time codes in the description down below, so you can kind of jump around at your perusal. We stream this show every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern, and same deal as before. If you haven't already, please like this video, and do not forget to subscribe. Okay, let's take a look at the box office from this past week. Total domestic box office was a little more than 95 million, which was a 28% jump, right? So, which is interesting considering that the number one movie is kind of like a flop, so to speak, but at least it's a higher earning flop, right? It's a flop considering, the brand of the property and the budget, as we'll talk about. But at least it added some extra kind of money in play. There was more money in play, right, for this weekend. And of course, the movie I was referencing at number one was Snow White, the 2025 live-action remake of the 1937 classic starring Rachel Zegler as the titular Snow White. If you're a returning viewer, you're going to notice that there's something different about this box office chart. And that's because I've added the tomato meter and the popcorn meter. This, of course, is from Rotten Tomatoes. And I figured the reason why I usually don't like Rotten Tomatoes, because a lot of people have misconception. Like if something, like for example, we'll talk about, like for Snow White, it has a 43%. It doesn't mean that critics gave an average score of 4.3 out of 10 or 43 out of 100. It means that 43% of reviews were a net positive. So you could have a movie on Rotten Tomatoes that's 100%, but everyone just gave it like 6 out of 10s, right? It's to give you a sense of, like, statistically speaking, what is the chances that you will have a net positive experience with this movie? And the popcorn meter is like the user score version of that. The reason why I decided to include them is I often talk about like, oh, this movie's doing well, but the reviews aren't good, or vice versa. I figured it would be useful to actually see those numbers, just to give us like a general sense of the tomato meter. I'm not British, so I say Rotten Tomatoes, but for some reason I only want to say tomato meter. That's easier to say than tomato meter. That's like the critical consensus, and then the popcorn meter is like the user consensus. So that could give us kind of a sense, or at least an additional context at like the numbers we're looking at here, right? So Snow White opened a little more than 42 million, which was within the projections, fell below my target. And I had talked about this last week. The projection of up to 70 felt like those numbers were from like an earlier projection. Most of the projections that I was seeing were closer to, again, that 37 to maybe like in the 50s range. So maybe that target was a little too high. It was a little unfair because it's based off of the total, scope of the range. But at least it met the projections, right? But again, the name of the game is as great as big numbers are for like headlines and creating buzz around a movie. This film has only made a little more than 85 million worldwide. It was made for almost more than $269 million. I thought it was closer to 250, which was already disgustingly high. But this is even worse, right? So it just goes to show that, if I made a movie and it would cost like $1 million and it made $85 million worldwide in its first weekend, that'd be a smashing success. So, like I said, as much as like big box office numbers are good for headlines, really you want to see that ROI, right? So as of right now, it's in the red. For every dollar put into it, it's basically losing 68 cents. Like you're not even, it's just a flop. And again, as you can see from the reviews, critics really did not like it. Audiences also didn't really like it. And, audiences are usually a little more forgiving. Unless like they're targeting a movie, like you see like the, what's it called? Like not rage reviews, like, review bombing, right? Where it's like, we've decided we don't like this movie because it's diverse or something. So we're all just going to go on and log like awful reviews and it'll tank the score, even if people haven't seen the movie. So I was actually a little surprised to see that it was at 74% for audiences. But I do remember that, and I actually did a video about this on the channel, that Rotten Tomatoes has changed like the popcorn meter like slightly, so to kind of like avoid review bombing. But nevertheless, audiences are usually a little more willing to say they liked a movie because they don't want to think they just wasted, $15 on the movie ticket in 2 hours or however long the movie was. So if a movie is like on this lower end, then it's not really clicking with them, right? Also opening this week at number 7 was the Alto Nights. This is kind of a Robert De Niro plays 2 characters in it, which is weird. It's like your very standard mob kind of movie. And it's just very traditional, or conventional, I should say. And it did not really do well. It at least made the projections, but just barely, right? So it was projected to make around 3 to 7 million. It made about 3.1, 3.2. I'd put a target around 5. Maybe that was a little too optimistic. And also not very good ROI. So it's only made about 5 million worldwide. It cost like $45 million to make. So it's even worse ROI, all things considered, right? So, I don't know what they were thinking. I always wonder why. Like, they make movies that are clearly so dated. Like, is it just like inertia that like they just like studios are just like, well, we've already been working on this movie, so we may as well. It's like the sunk cost fallacy. Like, we may as well just make it. And it's like who wanted this movie? I don't know. I'm sorry, but again, like the critics really did not like it. Audiences also, again, around 70%. So it's not really speaking to them, right? Continuing into their second week, we have Black Bag, right? Very good Rotten Tomatoes score, 97. Kind of a lower popcorn meter score. Brought in this weekend a little over 7 million. Only a 6% drop. That's a really good hold. I wonder if there was this, maybe not just Snow White. It's just this effect of, I don't know what it is. There's just more money in play, like we said, like we were saying earlier. Again, also still in the red, though. We've seen a lot of bombs, or I don't even want to say bombs, but just a lot of red in this far right column under percent return. Also continuing is Novocaine. So interestingly, Black Bag was at 4 last week, 4th place. It actually jumped up to 2nd place. Novocaine, I just hit my mic, sorry. Novocaine held its 3rd place spot. Again, pretty decent reviews, all things considered. It's like it seems to be a pretty enjoyable film. Brought in a little under 7 million. Bigger drop, 22%, but again, for a second week, that's not bad at all. And it's actually not on the red. It's on the green either, though, right? So it's made more than its budget, right? It's made almost 21 million worldwide off of an $18 million budget. But if you are viewers of my show regularly, you know that I often say that, in a perfect world, you want to like double your budget, because the budget does not account for things like marketing or advertising. And this isn't to say marketing and advertising is always the same amount as like the standard regular budget. But at least if you double the budget, then you're in the clear, right? So it is crossed this first threshold, but there's still a long way to go to get up to what would that be, 36 million, right? Also continuing into its second week, which is really interesting. The Day the Earth Blew Up, a Looney Tunes movie, jumped from 9th place to 6th place. Again, really very bizarre week. Very bizarre. And again, this isn't just the weekend. I do from Monday to Sunday. Again, very good reviews. Kind of had a weak opening, also in the red, but look at it had a 6% jump. That's insane. For a movie that was basically has had like zero marketing, and it was kind of written off and was basically just like the sloppy seconds that Warner Brothers didn't want. Maybe this could kind of, only in its second week, it's Legs, which, if you're new to the channel, Legs is basically a formula. I really come up with a different name because it just sounds weird calling it Legs, but the Legs are basically, you take the total domestic box office and you divide it by the biggest weekend. Usually it's the opening weekend, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, right? So the higher the number, it means that it's, you don't want to see a movie just make a bunch of its money opening weekend and then have this huge drop off, because it means that word of mouth was bad and people didn't want to go back to it. It doesn't really have good sustainability. In its second week, it's already over 2, right? So, again, that means that more than half of its domestic box office was this weekend, right? I think that's what that means. You know, I'm not the best at math. I'm pretty good, but not the best. So, again, still in the red, but maybe this has the potential. You know, again, what did it make this weekend? 3.3. If it can keep making that, at least I think it could get to at least 15. At least make back that initial budgetary number. But we'll just have to wait and see. Also continuing into its second week, we have The Last Supper. This is, again, like a religious movie, exactly what it sounds like. It's about Jesus, which I'm not against, right? Because I'm Catholic and I like religious movies like that. But held its 10th place spot. No review score, right? I even went on Letterboxd to see. Like, doesn't even have enough reviews for Letterboxd to even show the score. You could calculate it because they show you the distribution of how many people gave it what scores, but I'm not going to do that, right? But at least the people who saw it, which again is probably a self-selecting group, seem to like it decently. It has 81% when it comes to audiences. Again, only a small drop of 8%. That's not awful for a second week. Especially sometimes we've seen films drop 50, 60, 70% in their second week. What else do we got here? Captain America Brave New World, in its 6th week, still in the top 5, though it did drop from 2nd to 5th, and that accounts for Black Bag jumping up a bunch of spots. Again, critics didn't really like this. Audiences were a little bit more favorable to it, but again, 79% isn't anything to write home about when it comes to a Rotten Tomatoes audience score. Made a little under $6.5 million. This is in the green, interestingly enough, right? It's made over $400 million worldwide. It only cost $180 million to make it. But like what I've been saying week after week here is that, you know, this is probably internally being seen as disappointing from Disney and Marvel's perspective, considering how well movies, even like B or C level movies in the MCU were doing pre-Endgame. And it should not be the point of comparison, but comparing it to something like Deadpool and Wolverine from last summer, this definitely stings. That it's not a bigger box office and a bigger percent return, right? Let's see here. Also still here in the top 10, Dogman in its 8th week, dropping from 7th to 8th place. Again, pretty decent reviews and reception from audiences. Also in the green, The Monkey is also here. The Monkey is kind of, again, like it's I say predecessor, but they're not like sequels or related to each other. The Monkey is directed by Osgood Perkins, who did Longlegs from last year, which famously had a very, very good ROI because it cost like less than $10 million to make, and then it kept just making just money week after week. And this is perhaps poised to do something similar. It's not quite the social media craze that Longlegs was. If that felt very pop-y in a sense, like it felt like it kind of struck something in the zeitgeist. The Monkey, not so much, right? But it's still, again, that's a very impressive ROI at over 400%, almost 450%. That's the biggest ROI that we can see here in the top 10. I'm looking here at some comments. Mario Fanatic Animations. Hey, thanks for coming back. Super happy to see you. Hope you're enjoying the show. They say, quote, the sooner we get to the last of the Disney live action remakes to end, the better. 100%, right? And I actually did a video about this when they announced the Tangled live action movie. Just like, I think when I made that video, it was like a third of every Disney animated film, at least like their core animation studio, a third of them were either had been made into live action or they had announced live action remakes for it. And no one likes them. Like, even the best ones are good. At best. Good, just good. So, you know, eventually they're going to run out of stuff to adapt. Not just because they'll run out of movies, but even before then, they'll just be movies that they won't want to adapt. Like, they're not going to want to adapt The Black Cauldron. They're not going to want to adapt Atlantis or Treasure Planet, which would actually be really viable, interesting ideas to do live action remakes. Mario Fanatic Animations also writes review bombing by anti-woke grifters part. Maybe the part was the popcorn meter even review bombed on The Acolyte and What If Season 3. Yeah, so that's a big problem with Rotten Tomatoes specifically, but I guess you could say that with any website where people review, but since that's like the most prominent or like the one people pay the most attention to, again, like people have made a living off of just being like their whole brand being like anti-woke, right? So again, I'm surprised that Snow White doesn't have a worse popcorn meter score. But that might also just be chalked up to like they just don't give a shit as much in the sense that like there's other things to give a shit about perhaps from their perspective. Like this isn't even worth the trouble. Like that's how you know your film is so irrelevant that the anti-woke grifters won't like art review bombing it. Like that's a really sad bar, but maybe that is a bar that we should like be considering here. Also, looking ahead to this upcoming weekend, we have A Working Man. This is a Jason Statham movie. Kind of like, I guess like it's in the genre of like, Jason Statham is like a normal guy, but he's also able to like kick ass, right? So here's the premise for A Working Man on Wikipedia. Levin Cade, an ex-Royal Marines commando, leads a peaceful life as a construction worker in Chicago, the titular working man. However, Levin is forced to use his old set of skills to find his boss's teenage daughter, Jenny, who had been kidnapped by human traffickers, and soon uncovers a conspiracy of corruption and government agents' involvement in human trafficking. This is again not projected to make a lot. Snow White was like the big bright spot over the past couple of weeks. Despite it being a bomb, at least it's like the numbers are bigger. This is only projected to make around 10 to 16. I'm going to put the target like right in the middle, around 13, just to kind of keep things simple. We also have Death of a Unicorn. This is, I believe it's an A24 kind of horror comedy thriller movie where they like find, like they accidentally hit an animal with their car, but it turns out it's a unicorn, and it becomes like this whole kind of, I feel like A24 has really gotten like a little formulaic. At least with their trailers. Like every trailer for an A24 film feels like exactly the same. This is only projected to make around 7 to 15. I'm going to put the target around 10 on that lower side. Just because a lot of films like this just haven't been doing as huge of numbers lately, right? And then we have The Woman in the Yard. Again, another similar, not similar to that, but just similar to films that we've seen in the past. It's basically... Well, here's the Wikipedia premise. Seriously injured after a car crash that took her husband, Ramona now must care for their children alone in her rural farmhouse. Suddenly, a lone, spectral woman shrouded entirely in black appears on a family's front lawn without explanation and warns them today's the day. It feels like, I feel like every horror film is just trying to be like, what's like the most, like, how can we make this into a meme? Or like make it social media trendy? And I don't say this like, oh, movies used to be so much better. Like movies have always been cynical when it comes to their targeting of audiences and marketing and things like that. But it just feels like, it feels very effortful, instead of effortless, right? This is, again, a pretty small opening, only around 5 to 10 million. I'm going to put this around 7 as my target. Okay, so before moving on, I just want to give a quick plug. I have another YouTube channel I just recently started called Replay Rewind. 1,000 video games across 50 years of gaming history. Can I play them all before I die? Well, we're going to find out. It's basically my attempt to play all these different games. 99.9% of them I've never played. My gaming backlog is very embarrassing. And kind of going one by one, starting in like 1971. I just wrapped up doing Zork, which was a lot of fun. Definitely go check that channel out. I'm trying to grow it. Really, really would appreciate if you would go watch a video, leave a comment, like, and subscribe if you can. You can find the link to that in the description down below. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 1. So Disney's Bob Iger, CEO of course, has announced a sequel to the Disney Pixar film Coco, simply titled Coco 2. No Coco Vengeance or Coco Rising, just Coco 2. Going back to the old ways here. This was announced as part of the company's annual shareholder meeting, and Iger, we really know very little about it, but Iger said, quote, "While the film is just in the initial stages, we know it will be full of humor, heart, and adventure, and we can't wait to share more soon." End quote, excuse me. And it's going to be, we have some returning players here. Lee Unkrich, Unkrich, right? And Adrian Molina are going to be returning to direct and co-direct, respectively. And this is an opportunity for me to bitch and gripe about something that really doesn't matter. I'm going to say it's a Pixar thing because I just haven't seen it for other films, so it could very well just be an animation thing. You know, if Adrian Molina was the co-director of Coco. So that would imply that, like, oh, there's more than one director, and they're all co-directors. The way Pixar works is that, like, you have the director, and then, like, the sub-directors are called the co-directors. Not assistant directors, because assistant director is also another role. Because I always found that really confusing. So technically, Lee Unkrich is, like, the director of the original film, and now this new one, Adrian Molina, who is Mexican, I believe, is just the co-director. It would be kind of cool to see him just step up to the plate and be the director, but Disney and Pixar are playing things very, very safe, so they'd rather just have Lee Unkrich, you know, Pixar royalty. He's been there from the beginning, and he wasn't, like, one of, like, those core top guys, but he was, like, the next level down. Right, he's been there forever. He co-directed a bunch. He was one of several of the co-directors for a bunch of, like, the early iconic Toy Story films, and he was the director for Toy Story 3. Right, so he's kind of one of the few original guys left there. Right, but let's take a step back here and just if you've been living under a rock. Kind of give some context, you know, about Coco, right? So, of course, this is the 2017 film from Pixar Animation Studios. Here's, like, the Wikipedia, or maybe, no, actually, this is the Letterboxd blurb. The little paragraph synopses or premise. Quote, despite his family's baffling generations-old ban on music, Miguel dreams of becoming an accomplished musician like his idol, Ernesto de la Cruz. I also did, like, that white person thing where it's like we're talking and then we suddenly do it. Tortilla. Desperate to prove his talent, Miguel finds himself in the stunning and colorful land of the dead, following a mysterious chain of events. Along the way, he meets a charming trickster, Hector, and together they set off on an extraordinary journey to unlock the real story behind Miguel's family history, end quote. So, this, you know, Coco has, like, has a special place in my heart. I don't know if I put it in the category of one of my favorite movies ever, but it's definitely one of the better Pixar films post Toy Story 3, right? Pixar has gone through many different stages, but it's after Toy Story 3. I may as well, right? There's no time limit. I may as well just give you the background, right? So, Pixar was originally a independent company. And Disney, hold on, I'm just plugging my laptop. Disney would distribute their films, like Toy Story and Monsters, Inc. and Finding Nemo, things like that, right? By the mid 2000s, the distribution deal was about to expire, and they were and both sides were playing a game of chicken. So it got to the point where Disney, which was still run by Michael Eisner, was like, "Fuck it, we own the intellectual rights to these properties, like Toy Story, Monsters Inc. We'll just make our own sequels and spin-offs to these movies." And there was work done on, like, a Disney produced Toy Story 3. But then when Bob Iger took over for Disney, he just bought Pixar, right? So now it was just part of it. There was no need for these distribution deals and things like that. So that was like 2005 or 2006, I think. You really don't see Disney's influence. Like, because Toy Story 3 obviously started, like, the version that ended up becoming Toy Story 3 obviously didn't really start until Disney had bought Pixar. But it's really once you get past Toy Story 3 that you really start to see Disney's influence, right? So all of this to say, let's bring it back to what we're talking about here, Peter. Coco is one of their better films in this post-Toy Story 3 era, right? It's one of the few originals, which I actually looked up is not actually true. I guess between Toy Story 3 and now, I forget how many movies Pixar has made, but almost half of them have been original, which I was surprised to see. But then the reason why I'm surprised to see that is because a lot of those ended up during COVID, and just got, like, thrown on Disney Plus, and like they kind of didn't really make a big impact. Whereas, you know, back in my day, a Pixar film, it was an event. It meant something, right? And it was a delightful breath of fresh air. Again, I don't know if I would say it is great, but it has great parts, and it's just an overall really simple and really compelling just a really compelling, experience, top to bottom, right? It was cool to have the representation of the Latinx community, specifically of Mexican culture, right? With Dia de los Muertos, right? Dia de los Muertos. I'm sorry, I really should stop doing that. And notably, I did not know this. According to Wikipedia, Coco was the first film with an all Latino principal cast, or should I say Latinx? But in any case, an all Hispanic principal cast to have a 9-figure budget, right? It was made for like $175 million, but it was a critical and commercial success, right? It's not just it's good because it has representation, which is good enough itself. But critics loved it. It has a 97% on Rotten Tomatoes. It made nearly $800 million worldwide, again, off of that $175 million budget. And it won several awards, like at the Academy Awards. It won for Best Animated Feature against The Boss Baby, which is my hot take. Boss Baby is actually really good. But that's a topic for another day. And it also won for Best Original Song, Remember Me, which actually is a phenomenal song. And that was, so it's 2025. So this is about a little more than 7 years ago, because it was the end of 2017. It was like around Thanksgiving, I think. But the rap notes that the franchise has, the Coco franchise, if you can call it that, has slowly grown, right? There's an elaborate live show at the parks, the Disney parks. There's a dinner theater experience on the recent Disney Treasure cruise ship. It's a key part of Disney's Halloween programmings on both its cable channels and on streaming, which is kind of insensitive, I guess, because it's not about Halloween. It's about All Souls Day, right? Which is like the day after, right? Or All Saints Day. All Souls Day, right? The Day of the Dead, right? And last year at D23, they announced that they were going to have like a Coco ride at Disney California Adventure, which was described, it wouldn't be like a roller coaster. It was like, they described it as like a cross between the Haunted Mansion and Pirates of the Caribbean, right? So this announcement is not surprising, but it's a little disappointing, right? And this is continuing Pixar's mission to focus on sequels and spin-offs of established popular properties as much as possible, which I did a video about on this channel when they first kind of announced, it wasn't really an announcement in the way of like, we are going to make sequels and spin-offs, but more so like that was kind of reported on. It is unfortunate because I thought Coco, not only was it delightfully fresh because it was new, but also because it was left alone, right? Like, not everything needs a sequel. And even when sequels are good, you arguably didn't need the sequel. The sequel ended up being good in of itself. I thought the ending, like, if Coco, for all of its flaws, the best part of Coco is this moment that you see above my head here, right? Like that is just like peak filmmaking. Like, it is just incredible stuff. In terms of the music and like literally every cinematic element, from the writing to like the character arcs and like the cinematography, if you can call it that, right? I just feel like it ended in it just wrapped everything up. Like stories don't have to keep going on and on and on forever, right? But of course this makes sense, I guess, because Inside Out 2 from last year was such a smash hit. And, again, comparing Inside Out 2, which I didn't really care for all that much, but of course it did make beaucoup bucks, as the French would say. Comparing that to the slew of original films that we got during the COVID era, that were a mixed bag, both critically and commercially, right? And also you see, I'm sure Disney's being influenced by something like Moana 2, which of course isn't Pixar, but again, it's the same idea. Reinforce this thinking that, you take these franchises, and if you just make another one, again, I was making a joke about the naming conventions, but it's kind of true. Inside Out 2, Moana 2, because there was a period where having a numbered sequel was bad for marketing, so that's why you had so many like Moana, the story continued, like all these subtitles. I think now they're literally just like, audiences are just dumb. They just literally want to see more of the same thing. So that's a little disappointing. And then like the other thing, not to make every single thing I talk about political, but I'm also interested to see, I was also surprised to, not surprised, but it's interesting to see them continue another of their very few Hispanic properties, considering like the culture war that we're in right now. I mean, that we've been in for decades, but like has really reached a new epoch or epic. I always forget how you're supposed to say it. Notably, I don't remember there being like any controversy surrounding the original film when it came out. Like, oh, this is woke. Disney Pixar's making a movie about Mexicans. This is woke. Yeah, I don't remember anything like that. But has the political calculus changed? Which I'm not sure. That's a rhetorical question. I'm not really sure. Maybe Disney isn't afraid of making a Coco 2 because Latinos are becoming more conservative, and that's like the dominant cultural group right now is conservative. So I'm not quite sure. I could also really just be reading into it and looking for problems where there are none, right? Mario Fanatic Animation says, if Coco has a sequel in the making, so why can't the same be said for Elemental since there's more story to tell for Ember and Wade's relationship? 100%. I saw Elemental. I think Coco is better. Frankly, I don't know if you feel one way or the other about that, but I liked Elemental, and there's definitely room there for more stories with those characters in a way that it's just not there, because Coco was just so emotionally satisfying and so cathartic. It kind of almost feels insincere or cynical to like reopen that up. Like it's settled, as lawyers say, it's settled law, right? So I'm sure it'll be good, but will it really justify the hundreds of millions of dollars they're going to put into it and not pay their Disney World employees better? Probably not. I gotta stop making it political, but also I shouldn't stop making it political. Okay, before moving on, I gotta give another plug. I gotta do it to another project I work on with a podcast I did with my fiance Viviana called Now That's What I Call a Franchise, where we pick a film franchise and we go through every single installment, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This season we've been doing all things Middle Earth, so Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, you name it. It's been a lot of fun. We're just about to wrap up on that. Definitely go check that out. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also just find us on YouTube if that's your preferred way to podcast. You can also just find us in the link down in the description below. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Another Disney political story. Okay. Let's talk about story number 2. So, in a surprising move, or maybe it's not so surprising, Disney shareholders voted down a proposal to cut ties with the LGBTQ rights organization, the Human Rights Campaign, which I didn't know by name, but then I looked them up and saw like the flag with the blue background and the yellow equal sign, and I was like, oh, I know them. They were, I know them by sight now. The Disney shareholders voted on a proposal to cut ties with this organization's annual Corporate Equality Index. Basically, exactly what it sounds like, where this organization will kind of grade different companies based off of how inclusive they are to different marginalized groups, right? I think specifically towards the queer community. But if it's named the Human Rights Campaign, you would think it would be for all human rights, but I digress. Maybe they are. I don't really know enough about them. This proposal that was put in front of the shareholders was originally submitted by right-wing think tank, the National Center for Public Policy Research, through their Free Enterprise Project initiative, which calls itself, quote, the original and premier opponent of the woke takeover of American corporate life, end quote. And in their argument for putting this proposal in front of the Disney shareholders, they said, quote, when corporations take extreme positions, sidebar of accepting people, I'm not sure what that means, they destroy shareholder value by alienating large portions of their customers and investors. This proposal provides Disney with an opportunity to move back to neutral, end quote. Again, can't necessarily speak to the business practices necessarily of like the employees and things like that, but the thing about this quote here is people who would argue against this quote, in which I'm in that camp. A lot of people would use the argument of like, no, it doesn't destroy shareholder value. My argument is, yeah, it probably does, but it's worth it, right? Like, it might be pragmatic or practical, to try to convince people actually doing the right thing will actually make you money. But more times than not, it doesn't. But you should still do it anyway, if it's something you believe, right? Disney notably has maintained a perfect score for this corporate equality index. And the FEP, right, the Free Enterprise Project, says this, quote, can only be attained by abiding by its partisan, divisive, and increasingly radical criteria, end quote. And they go on even further, saying, quote, the threat of a bad score is wielded against corporations to force them to do the political bidding of HRC and others like GLSEN, the Trevor Project, and GLAAD, which Disney also has paid partnerships with, that seek to sow gender confusion in children, encourage... I don't know why I'm reading this like I'm like an evil... advisor to the king, right? Like, sow gender confusion in children, encourage irreversible surgical procedures on confused teens, effectively eliminate girls and women's sports and bathrooms, and roll back long-standing religious liberties, end quote. That's kind of a stretch, but also a lot of what they just said is just homophobic and transphobic and just backwards and ignorant. Sorry, snowflake conservatives. If you're watching, the Disney board, in response to this proposal, recommended to their shareholders that they reject the proposal, saying, quote, given the company's existing practices to assess participation and transparency efforts and the board's oversight of ESG, environmental, social, and governance reporting, workforce equity matters and human rights policies, we do not believe workforce equity matters and human rights policies. That's a weirdly structured sentence. We do not believe this proposal would provide additional value to shareholders, end quote. And the preliminary tally shows only 1% of shareholders voted in favor of the proposal. So they overwhelmingly rejected cutting ties with this group. Eric Blom, who's the VP of Corporate Citizenship at the Human Rights Campaign Foundation, said, quote, this vote gives us a clear statement of values from Disney shareholders. They know what we know, that despite all the noise, commitments to inclusion pay figurative dividends to help their literal bottom line, end quote. Again, I'm not sure if that's true or even needs to be true to do it, but if that is true, that's a bonus, right? So the reason why I'm talking about this story is because I found it surprising, especially considering Disney's relationship with the queer community over the past couple of years, especially the last 12 months, right? You know, because the queer community loves Disney, right? You know, I hope this isn't coming off as homophobic but the Venn diagram of people in the queer community and Disney adults, there's a big overlap, right? And you could discuss why those reasons might be, but in any case, they are very, very big supporters of the Disney media empire. And Disney understood that and began leaning into it when they realized, or at least thought it was profitable, right? So like the 2010s, marriage equality is becoming more mainstream. Eventually it becomes legal in all 50 states. But as you've seen over the past couple of years, they've really started to scale things back. Of course, the big, the starting gun, right, was Florida's Don't Say Gay bill, and Disney really taking a wishy-washy stance on that when Bob Chapek was running the company. Then Bob Iger comes back and says that they have to stop making movies that have like messages, which again, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but if you've watched my channel, you know I really hate this quote by Iger because it implies that because these movies don't really have no cogent political messages. So really what he's saying is the existence of people of color or women or trans people or gay people is itself a message, and we need to scale that back, which is really insulting. And then even within like the past 12 months, like I was saying, Disney, I did a video about this. Disney toned down. I did a video about like all of these things, I think. Disney toned down any queer undertones found in Inside Out 2 with Riley and the girl on the hockey team that she seems to have a really strong infatuation with. Most recently, they cut the trans storyline from the Pixar Disney Plus show Win or Lose. They removed references to DEI, again, as many companies are doing to kind of avoid any ire from President Trump in the White House. So that's why it was surprising to see not only them reject this proposal, at least the shareholders reject this proposal, but overwhelmingly so, 99%. Effectively everybody. So I was like, does this mark a shift back towards being more accepting of this community? And the answer is probably not. It could be Disney cynically trying to throw the queer community a bone because they know that their image is being hurt by all of these, things that they're doing in terms of rejecting the community. It could also just be completely detached from corporate directives, right? Because again, these are the shareholders. Though the board themselves did suggest, hey, we recommend you vote, you reject this proposal. But it's an interesting little bright spot in an otherwise very concerning and disappointing series of events where Disney and other corporations are kind of throwing these communities under the bus because they never really cared about them in the first place. They only embraced them because they thought it would help them make money. And now that it's not making money or even worse, losing the money, they're going to drop it like a bad habit. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay, let's talk about story number 3. The DOJ has charged director Carl Eric Rinsch, who I'd never heard of before doing the story. They've charged him for defrauding Netflix out of $11 million. He's been charged with 1 count of wire fraud, 2 counts of money laundering, and 4 counts of engaging in monetary transactions related to illegal activity. That's 7 counts. That's a lot of counts. The Hollywood Reporter notes that he faces up to 90 years in prison if the sentences were to be served consecutively. And I have a quote here from Matthew Podolsky, who's the acting United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, who says that Rinsch, quote, orchestrated a scheme to steal millions by soliciting a large investment from a video streaming service, because the charges don't actually name Netflix, but very simple reporting reveals that it was, in fact, Netflix. Let me continue the quote. Claiming that the money would be used to finance a television show that he was creating. But that was fiction. Rinsch instead allegedly used the funds on personal expenses and investments, including highly speculative options and cryptocurrency trading, end quote. So let's break down this situation. If you clicked on this video hoping I would teach you how to commit fraud, you're going to be mistaken. But perhaps maybe walking through what he did, maybe you'll get some ideas, but that is not what we're trying to do here. So again, Carl Rinsch, he's an American director who made the film 47 Ronin, which I guess wasn't well received critically and did not really, it was like a bomb. Like it didn't even make back its budget. But in 2017, I think that film came out in 2013. Later on in 2017, he began filming short-form episodes of a series, potential series, using his own money as well as investment from other production companies. Eventually, Netflix hired Rinsch to create, to flesh out this sci-fi series for Netflix, and the show was going to be called White House. And the premise was going to focus on a scientist who creates a human-like species that turns against their creators. So nothing crazy, but could be cool depending on the execution. And Netflix gave Rinsch an additional $11 million in 2020, right? And this was supposedly going to paying the crew and finishing editing the footage that had already been shot, right? But what he then does with that $11 million is he slowly moves it out of the business bank account and into his own personal brokerage account. And he starts spending this money on risky securities trades, right? And within just 2 months, he lost more than half of that $11 million. He then, I think, took the rest of the money, put it into crypto, and then when crypto had a big boost, I'm not sure when this happened specifically, but in any case, he was able to make millions of dollars in profit. So how did he use that money? Did he use that money to finish the show, but even with more money now to make it even better? No, he bought 5 Rolls Royces and other luxury items. He paid for lawyers to handle his divorce, and he also used the money to pay for lawyers to sue Netflix for further payments to finish the show. He was looking for an additional $14 million. And this was already semi-resolved. An arbitrator ruled, again, I forget when this was, but an arbitrator ruled that he owed Netflix at least $9 million. So now he is, he has to pay the piper now. All of these illegal and unethical decisions have finally caught up with him. And here's the thing. Here's the rub. obviously this is very illegal and very unethical. But I kind of respect the hustle. Like, you know what I mean? Like I would never do this because I want to make more movies and TV shows in the future. But, you know, if a company gives you $11 million, like, go make this thing. Like, I'm surprised that that's how the business is actually done. That it's just like, oh yeah, here's this money, go finish it, right? Like, I kind of respect the hustle, but I don't respect that he's a big meanie poopy pants, and he's probably gonna go to jail. So that's pretty unfortunate for him. Okay, before moving on, I want to give another plug for a YouTube channel I have called Peter Squared, where I also cover topics related to film, media, entertainment, but in a more structured video essay format. The video I have up right now is called A Closer Look at Frozen, where, you guessed it, I take a closer look at the Disney film Frozen, taking a look at what went right, what went wrong, and everything in between using these cartoon versions of myself. It was a lot of fun to make. Hopefully it's a lot of fun to watch, so go check that out. Comment and let me know how you disagree with everything I say in the video. You can find the link to that in the description down below. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. All right, let's talk about story number 4. So Don Lemon has revealed that he himself has experienced sexual harassment multiple times throughout his career. He spoke about this on Bill Maher's podcast Club Random, saying, quote, "I've been harassed by women and men in the workplace. There are some things that are really egregious, but not everything is Harvey Weinstein level," end quote. So of course, Don Lemon, television journalist, he hosted Don Lemon Tonight on CNN from 2014 to 2023, until he was removed from CNN after insensitive comments that he's made in the past about women. I think the one that really got him in trouble was talking about Nikki Haley being, past her prime, despite her only being like 50 something. So, and he's gay, right? He's a gay man. And that's a problem in the gay man community, if you can call it that, of kind of being misogynistic. Not all gay men, right? Hashtag not all gay men, but that is a big problem in the community, right? And talking about these experiences that he had, he says he never reported these instances because he wasn't sure he'd be believed, and at worst, he was afraid of potentially even getting removed from CNN. This is back like when he first started at CNN. I think like as a correspondent, or maybe even when he started like full time as the host of that show. So what are his claims? So again, he mentions 2 specific instances. One was at a CNN cafeteria in Atlanta, where in the cafeteria, a young lady tweaked his nipples. So I'm not trying to make this funny, but it's just tweaked and nipples are just funny words. I'm sorry. But a young lady tweaked his nipples saying, quote, "Oh, it's cold in here," end quote. And then talking to Bill Maher, he said, quote, "I said, okay, you realize if I did that, they'd be walking me out the door right now. But I didn't care to go to HR. I didn't say anything because I was just like, it's a double standard. It's fine," end quote. And there was another instance, different woman, off company property, also in Atlanta. And he said to Bill Maher, quote, "Someone who I worked with also harassed me at CNN, and I never went to management. She knew I was gay, and it was just bizarre. She was going through a divorce. It was just weird." There's a lot of cocktail parties, and remember, this was a while ago, and there was not Uber or anything like that. And if you are in Atlanta, taxis aren't available. So you say, "Hey, we've had a couple drinks. Do you mind if I like..." And then the person says, No, don't go home. Stay in the guest room." That sort of thing. End quote. And Lemon admits, he's like, to be fair, it's different for him as a man, right? As opposed to being a woman sexually harassed in the workplace. Saying, quote, "I'm an adult, and maybe I think it is different for men and women depending on the power structure. I think it's flattering as long as you could send them off easily. As a man, I could say, no, I'm not interested," end quote. He also, talking to Bill Maher, revealed that he was molested as a child, which I don't think anyone knew. And Bill Maher was like, wait, let me just get this straight. Is that what you said? And he ties it into his situation, saying, quote, "Because you know how to deal with it and you know what's really important or not. And you know, like, who has the power. I figure as a man, I have the power to say, I don't want to. I don't need to go to HR, ruin your career. I just tell you, I'm not interested in this. You were drunk. We had a couple of drinks or whatever. Let's let it go," end quote. So he kind of plays it off like, it wasn't okay, but I knew that it would be okay for me to just resist that. Though I think he also mentions, talking to Bill Maher, that second instance of that woman who knew he was gay and she was going through a divorce, I think he said like after he kind of like rejected her, she was like super mean to him after the fact, which isn't cool, right? And I think Don Lemon is completely right in that it is different, right? Because he's not necessarily worried about he was worried about reporting it, but he wasn't worried in saying no. Whereas a lot of women who are in uncomfortable situations feel like they have to go along with it because their career or even their physical safety could be in jeopardy, right? Though, and I don't think he's not saying this, but I just want to make this clear. Just because it's different for men doesn't mean it's non-existent or unimportant, right? Because sexual harassment and assault and things like that are, of course, about sex, but they're really about power structures. And power structures can manifest in ways that don't always graft onto our conceptions of who is in power and who is not. So if you have a female executive sexually harassing a male employee, it's still a problem, because even though the gender roles are swapped here, it's still about power, and one person there's a power imbalance. So I gotta give him credit. Again, he hasn't always been the most politically correct, especially again when it comes to women. But I think it's important for more men to admit when they've been sexually harassed by women or other men, right? And he even says so these are the only two that he talks about, but presumably there were other times with other people. And I think the more we talk about these things, the less or the more we can work to dismantle these kinds of things from happening. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay, let's talk about story number 5. So Coyote versus Acme. The reports of its death have been greatly exaggerated. It may finally see the light of day, after all, with Ketchup Entertainment's potential acquisition of the rights from Warner Brothers. This would reportedly be a roughly $50 million deal to put the film in theaters in 2026. Ketchup, the reason why they're notable here is that they recently distributed the Looney Tunes movie currently in theaters, The Day the Earth Blew Up, a Looney Tunes movie. This was also a movie given up by Warner Brothers Discovery and shopped around to other distributors. It's made about $9 million at the worldwide box office so far, which it's still kind of flopping because of the budget, which I think is around 15 or something. But it's had 0 advertising, and actually this past week it actually had a 6% jump. So maybe it could end up kind of turning not a profit, but at least doing a little bit better in terms of having some staying power in theaters and good word of mouth, right? But looking at Coyote versus Acme, so this is a film based on a 1990 article from the New Yorker. And here's the description of the premise from Wikipedia, saying, quote, "After every product made by the Acme Corporation has backfired on Wile E. Coyote, Wile and then E as the middle initial, in his pursuit of the Roadrunner, a down-and-out billboard human attorney represents Wiley in his lawsuit to sue Acme. A growing friendship between Wile E. Coyote and his lawyer motivates their determination to win the court case, as it pits them against the intimidating boss of Wiley's lawyer's former law firm, who now represents Acme," end quote. And it was described as kind of almost like a Roger Rabbit-esque live-action animation hybrid film. And people who have seen it said it's pretty good. I think, some of the discussion about it has been a little overblown, being like, this movie was going to be the greatest movie ever. It probably wasn't going to be the greatest movie ever. But it had a $70 million budget, which is high, right? Especially for a property that most people don't really give a shit about, unfortunately, just like the general public. So at a certain point, Warner Brothers Discovery, now Warner Brothers Discovery, right? Because this is when Warner Brothers and Discovery merge. David Zaslav becomes the CEO. And he decides to cancel the film in order to get a $30 million tax write-off. This was one of several films that Warner Brothers axed for the same reason, like Batgirl and another Scooby-Doo animated movie for theaters. So this move, for all of those films, but especially Coyote versus Acme, the backlash was vocal, persistent, and severe. even from like the people who made the film, with Will Forte saying even as recently as a month ago, quote, "It is such a delightful movie. It deserves so much better. I can't tell you possibly why the decision was made not to release it, but it makes my blood boil," end quote. Eventually, with enough pressure, the Warner Brothers Discovery, quote unquote, reversed course and allowed the director of the film, Dave Green, to shop the film around to other potential distributors. And I think I even did a story about it on the channel that studios like Netflix and Amazon were interested, but nothing ended up coming to fruition. So now it's potentially finally gonna see the light of day, which, again, you know, for better, like, this is not like a film in development, or like, it was basically finished. Films should never be canceled like that. When they're that far along, right? And I'm sure legally and by like the letter of the law, this would not make sense or work out, but I heard someone make an argument like, if it's for a tax write-off, okay, so then at that point, it's basically you're getting paid by taxpayers, so the film belongs to the taxpayers, and it should just be released and now be public domain. Again, I'm sure there's like actual legalese that would be like, okay, that actually isn't how that would work, but like on principle, like, it seems wrong that we as the taxpayers are going to pay you to not release this product, right? Because at the end of the day, cinema is art. I hope that's not, not to be controversial, but in line with my buddy Marty Scorsese. Marty Scorsese says cinema is art, right? It obviously, at least in the United States, it's so intertwined with the business capitalistic side of things, but it does not and should not exist solely to make money. And it's just a shame that this was canceled, and I hope that we can at least see it. I don't care how we see it. I don't care if it's in theaters or on streaming. I just want people to at least see this movie. This finished movie should be available for posterity, for future generations. Okay, so that wraps up the show. Just want to give one last plug to Cinema Q. So it's not just a YouTube channel. It started as and still is a Substack newsletter where we publish written reviews for new movies coming out. Primarily at this point now, because I've gotten kind of busy, primarily by my co-contributor and very, very good friend, Jacob Boblet. He recently did a review of Mickey 17, which was a lot of fun, so definitely go check out that. You can find the link to that in the description down below. You can also go to your browser, type in cinemaandqso.substack.com. Once again, thank you all so much for watching. If you haven't yet, please like this video. It really, really helps with engagement and the algorithm and people finding the channel. So if you have found the channel, why not subscribe? We're trying to grow this community as best we can. Until next time, peace out.